Well, this is our bonus section. Not frequently asked questions and their answers that came from SBA and Treasury, which we've just spent a whole bunch of time on. But these are a couple of questions I've thought up and a couple of questions that our webcast audience, viewers, have thought up we thought might be interesting. Now you can see that I'm joined by a guest. This is Vern Hoven. And if you're wondering why we are not 6 feet apart in COVID-19 territory, it's because it's too late. We're married. That could be why, that we are in our own marital bubble. And therefore, I can sit this close to him. Although sometimes I'm wondering about that. All right, so
especially when it comes to the bonus round here that we've got.
Yeah, we're going to do a bonus round.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Sharon some questions and just see if she can interpret it into understandable language, for the simple reason that I don't want to hear an answer that's got 2.5 twelfths at all, ever.
Okay,
Again.
all right.
Okay, and yet, what's the first bonus question?
Mhm.
Hey Sharon, can the borrower apply for a loan forgiveness before the end of the covered period?
Yes. All right, so we had an 8-week covered period, and that wasn't long enough under the original CARES. The original CARES, Congress thought that this would all be over with in 8 weeks, that we would be back to normal and living a normal life, and that didn't happen in 8 weeks. So Congress revised the covered period rule to 24 weeks, thinking, well, let's count it as 6 months. Maybe this is going to take 6 months. So we're all rooting for that, praying for that. We would like to see 6 months. So the question is, 8 weeks is my period if I took my loan out before June 5th. That's when the new legislation extended the effective date for the extension to 24-week covered period. Now, I can, if I took my loan out before June 5th, you heard me say this before, and SBA tell us before, I can elect to use the 8-week period. But I'm going to use the 24-week period because I need the extra weeks to spend my money on payroll or non-payroll costs. So the question is, I've spent all the money at the end of 12 weeks. Do I have to wait until the end of my covered period, the end of 24 weeks, in order to put in my application? And the answer is, I can submit my loan forgiveness application at any time for any period. So I could pick a 12-week period or a 16-week period, anything within that original, my 24 weeks. I can pick any one. So that's been asked by, dozens of viewers, but I don't want to wait until the end of 24 weeks. And in a minute or two, we'll discuss why I would pick an 8-week versus picking a 24-week, sort of the versus conversation. But right now, I've used all my loan proceeds at the end of 12 weeks. I can cut off my covered period then. If the borrower, I'm going to give up something if I choose to stop my covered period early. If the borrower applies for forgiveness before the end of the covered period, and has reduced any employee's salaries or wages more than the 25%, the borrower must account for the excess salary reduction for the full 24-week covered period, or the full 8-week if I happen to have elected that. I don't think this is going to happen. I don't think this is going to happen for the 8-week, because we're not going to cut it off at 5 weeks or 6 weeks because of the way the calculation was made on the 8-week. It's going to happen for the 24-week covered period. So if you apply early for the forgiveness before the end of the 24 weeks, you are going to lose something. And what you're going to lose is the 25% reduction of salaries. You have to count that as a reduction to your forgiveness amount on the same proportion calculation that we talked about before. You're going to continue to count that as if it were for the full 24 weeks. If you'd waited longer, maybe you would have brought salaries back up again. But in this case, you will have to count it because you picked an earlier time. The forgiveness amount is reduced as if the salary reduction were in effect for the remainder of the covered period. That's a quote from one of the interim final rules. Now, that's the answer, is that I can pick any time before. I've spent all the money. Now, the question might be, why would I choose that? And it might be because
Well, just wait a minute. Don't give away the good show right here, because I want to ask that question to you. Should I elect the 8-week covered period?
Well, I received my loan disbursement. I received that loan disbursement before June 5th. So I can use an 8-week covered period. Should I elect that 8-week covered period? I guess if I spent all of the money, and I spent it in the right way, then that makes sense that I might want to use an 8-week covered period. And I have just a few bullet points here on why the 8-week period might be better, or why I might go for the 24-week. You know, if I went for the 24-week, I could actually decide in the middle of my 24 weeks, in 8 weeks, that I'm going to cut it off, my covered period, at the end of an earlier time. So let's look at which is better.
That's right.
And I wanted to sort of think about this. So how about the 8 weeks? Why would I want 8 weeks? Why would I elect on one of my early loans for my borrower with an early loan? Well, I've spent all the money and I just want to get this over with. Just want to get it over with. It's all spent. I don't have a reduction in FTEs. I didn't reduce salaries. I just want the SBA to tell me it's all forgiven. So it's to get it over with. That's number one. Number two is, I'm worried what else Congress is going to do. I mean, we all think that it will get better. You know, that the calculations of forgiveness will get better because they have eased up in legislation. For instance, saying that you have to spend 60% of the money on payroll costs instead of 75% as SBA and Treasury decided. So we don't know if it'll get better. We also don't know if I wait for the 24 weeks or some longer period than the 8 weeks that I'm entitled to elect. We don't know what's going to happen for hotspots. If we're going to go back to phase 1, if our phase 3 goes back to phase 2, if we have a 2.10 revision, bars on the Florida beaches, or inside or outside eating at the restaurants, or opening of beauty salons or nail salons, all of that depends on if we're in a hotspot or not. So getting this over with, I qualify. Our client has a $400,000 PPP loan. And they took out the loan when it was an 8-week period and worked really hard to make sure that during that 8 week they met the FTE and the wage reduction rules. So they know they qualify for forgiveness. So is there any reason they should choose not elect that? No. Now, if we looked at why I picked the 24-week, I picked the 24-week for a client. I just said to a client that although they took the loan before June 5th, that I thought 24-week was right for them because they could spend more on payroll. And you remember that the owner employee, it's limited to the $20,833. For other employees, it is as much as $45,000. We did those numbers earlier. So more of the money can be spent on payroll costs. if I pick the 24 instead of the 8-week. And the safe harbors allow the borrower until December 31st or the forgiveness application date, if that's earlier, to restore FTE and wage reductions.